Good morning and welcome to the Kennebec Valley Chamber of Commerce Business Insider Breakfast Seminar. My name is Ross Cunningham. I'm the President and CEO of the Kennebec Valley Chamber of Commerce. A special thank you to our Business Insider sponsors, Kennebec Savings Bank and Central Maine Power. This morning we'll hear from Maine State Economist Amanda Rector. Amanda is the State Economist at the Governor's Office of Policy and Management. She serves as the Governor's liaison to the U.S. Census Bureau, is a member of the Revenue Forecasting Committee, and supports the Director of Office of Policy and Management on economic and tax policy issues affecting Maine. She conducts ongoing analysis of Maine's economy and demographics to inform policy decisions. Amanda started working for the state in 2004 and has been State Economist since 2011. She earned a bachelor's in economics from Wellesley and a master's degree in public policy from the Muskie School of Public Service. She is also a graduate of Leadership Maine program. It's my pleasure to introduce Amanda Rector.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm glad that I didn't have to drive all that far out of my way this morning. I've done a couple of these breakfasts where I've had to get up very, very early, so I appreciate not having to get up at 4 o'clock today. I am an unabashed data person, so I've brought a whole bunch of charts that I want to show you this morning. I will not blame you if you want to have another cup of coffee first. I'm not going to hold that against you. And I am going to start this morning talking about demographics. I see, yes, good call, good call. I'm going to talk about demographics first off. That's my absolute favorite topic. I know, it's sad, but it's the truth. And so lucky you, I have brought a sneak peek of my brand new population projections. They've not actually been released yet, so you get a little advance look-see at these. So I produced projections of state and county population in 5-year age cohorts and sects for 5-year intervals. So these new projections use 2012 as the starting point, and they cover 2017, 2022, 2027, 2032. The projections themselves are sobering. In total, the columns all the way over on the right here, Maine and Kennebec County are both expected to see slight declines in population through 2032. More important, though, are the projections by age group. I've included population change in this chart for 2 different times. The 2012 to 2017 time period, and then 2017 to 2032. The first, it's a little hard to see in this. The lighter colors are the earlier time period, and then the darker colors are the later time period. Even in just the next few years, there are significant changes in the age cohorts, and these are really magnified in the longer term. So from 2012 to 2017, the largest decline, and Maine and Kennebec County are both pretty similar in their percentage changes here. The largest decline will be a drop of about 20% in the population of 40 to 44-year-olds. From 2017 to 2032, the largest decline will be a drop of almost 40% in the population of 55 to 59-year-olds. On the other side, the largest increase from 2012 to 2017 will be a gain of 30% in the population of 70 to 74-year-olds. And from 2017 to 2032, the population of 75 to 84-year-olds is projected to grow by nearly 80%. That's that really, really tall group of columns over there. The driving factor here, of course, is the aging of the baby boom generation. So in 2012, members of this generation were 48 to 66 years old, so just starting to enter the traditional retirement ages. In 2032, they will be between the ages of 68 and 86. So as the baby boomers age, Maine and Kennebec County will see considerable losses in the 40 to 64 age groups, and then tremendous increases in the 65 plus age groups. I know 2032 seems like a really far point at this stage of the game, especially when I think about the fact that my toddler could very well be graduating from high school that year. But really, it's not that far off. So this shift has a lot of implications for the economy. This chart is from a recent Department of Labor report on Maine's workforce outlook. The most important of the implications around demographic shift is for the workforce. You can see that from 2012 to 2022, the greatest population loss will be the 45 to 54-year-olds. They're expected to have a labor force participation rate of around 83% in 2022. The greatest population gain will be those aged 65 and older. Their expected labor force participation rate is around just 25%. So our population will be shifting from this high engagement in the labor force to much, much lower engagement in the labor force. Of course, these projections are based on current migration, birth, and mortality rates, which means that if we want to change these projections, we really need to change these trends to make sure that we have more of an available workforce in the future. There are many different ways that we can get at this. We can attract more workers. We can make sure we're utilizing all the potential workers that we have already in the state. And we can help older workers to stay engaged in the workforce longer. Simply put, unless we do something, we're going to have a warm bodies problem, where we just simply don't have enough people to fill the available jobs in the not too distant future. This is a situation we do not want to find ourselves in. I know Governor LePage has several policy proposals that are out now and in development that are really designed to try to get at some of these issues. Many of them are included in the budget. Everybody's talking about the budget. It's out there now, being debated not just in the legislature but in the press as well. So for example, the proposed income tax exemption on the veterans' benefits would encourage those men and women, many of whom are skilled workers who are currently looking for a second career, to engage in the workforce here in Maine. There are also some policies in the works that the governor has hinted at that will ease student loan debt burdens, something near and dear to my heart as I continue to pay off student loans, that would make Maine a more attractive place for younger workers to live and work and raise a family. There really is no single solution to Maine's demographic problem. We really need to come at it from many different angles if we're really going to be successful. So ensuring an available workforce is really a key part of making sure that we can have economic growth going forward, particularly employment growth. So the Maine Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission meets a couple times a year to set the official economic forecast for the state. Their next report is coming right up. It's due April 1st. They'll be meeting later this month. But their last report was November 1st, and that's what these data are from. Employment in Maine peaked back in 2007 before the recession. We have seen some growth recently, but we're expected to exceed the pre-recession peak in 2017. That is a full 10 years after the previous peak. And you can actually see that beyond that point, employment growth really levels off. And that is a direct result of the expectations around Maine's demographics. Specifically that limited availability of workers that I mentioned. We need to enact policies that are going to help improve Maine's demographic outlook if we're going to improve this and the overall economic outlook. Businesses look for states with growing populations when they're making location decisions. They need to know that they're going to have an available workforce in the coming years. And Maine's current demographics really are not terribly encouraging for businesses. Since the recession, there are two sectors that have provided most of the employment growth in the state: professional and business services and education and health services. This is not going to change in the next few years. These two sectors are going to continue to provide most of the economic growth going forward in terms of employment growth. In fact, education and health services, you can see if you look at the first dark bar in those two tallest columns and then look at the middle bar in those two sections, the education and health services took over as the largest sector in Maine in terms of employment. Trade, transportation, and utilities, which is mostly retail trade in Maine, had previously been the largest employing sector. And the demographics that I've been hammering on are, again, one of the driving reasons behind this as well. You know, the aging population really is driving a lot of the growth in health services. This is actually one of the biggest differences between Maine's economy and the rest of the nation. Our employment by industry typically looks a lot like the US, with two major differences. If you look at professional and business services and education and health services, we have a relatively smaller share of employment in professional and business services and a relatively larger share of employment in education and health services. And this, again, is tied in part to our ranking as the state with the oldest median age, which was 43.9 years in 2013. I always like showing this chart. It's important to keep in mind that when I'm talking about employment growth, employment and GDP are not necessarily the same thing in terms of the economic drivers of the state. So we just saw in terms of employment, the industry sector that contributes the largest share is education and health services. But if you're talking about gross domestic product, far and away, financial activities. And there's actually a pretty straightforward explanation. Financial activities includes the real estate sector. So real estate is a big contributor in terms of Maine's GDP. And so I like to point this out to people because I often get asked about the biggest industry in the state. And it really depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking about employment? Or are you talking about GDP? Or are you talking about something else completely different? And again, on the other side of this, financial activities is a much larger share of GDP than it is of employment. Education and health services and leisure and hospitality are a relatively smaller share compared to their share of employment. So wage and salary disbursements are the largest component of total personal income for Maine. Both wage and salaries and total personal income are very closely tied to these employment growth rates that I talked about earlier. Basically, the more people you have working, the more the wages are going to increase, and then the higher the total income in the state. The figures in this chart have been adjusted for expected inflation. And you can see that we are still expected to see some good personal income growth over the next few years, but that rate of growth, again, is going to slow as employment growth is expected to slow going forward. If you look at 2018 and 2019, those rates of growth are a bit lower. I also want to note that these growth rates are for total personal income. It's not disposable personal income. So, some of the income tax reform proposals that the governor has out there would reduce the individual income tax rates. So that would leave a larger share of this income growth in the pockets of Maine workers and businesses. I do say both workers and businesses that would benefit from these individual income tax rate reforms. Maine's economy depends very heavily on what are called pass-through businesses. These are businesses where the business's profits are passed through directly to the owners, and so are taxed on the individual income tax reform rather than on a corporate tax return. This includes things like sole proprietorships, S corporations, LLCs, and partnerships. If you look across New England, Maine has the second highest rate of pass-through businesses as a percent of total private sector businesses. That over 92% of Maine establishments are pass-through businesses out of the private sector, and over 62% of employment in the private sector is in these pass-through businesses. So that makes the governor's individual income tax reforms much more comprehensive than a lot of people realize. So many of Maine's businesses are structured in such a way that these profits are taxed at the individual income rate levels, and very often in those highest tax brackets. So lowering those rates makes it easier for these businesses to invest a greater share of the profits back in the business, add more workers, raise the wages of the existing workforce, and that in turn will increase our income growth that we saw in the previous slide. I did mention the income growth chart had been adjusted for inflation. Inflation itself really isn't expected to be an issue over the coming years. It's expected to stay below 3%. This was from the last Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission meeting in November. Recently, inflation has been held back by the nosedive in energy prices, especially in oil products. As those prices are expected to stay low, they're going to keep inflation from increasing in the near term. And in fact, this is from a more recent forecast from Moody's Analytics. This is the Energy Consumer Price Index. And for 2015, it's actually pretty considerably negative, essentially deflation for energy prices this year. Now, this is a more recent forecast, as I mentioned, so it's entirely possible that if we do see that lower rate in 2015, it'll bring down the overall inflation for 2015 as well. So that 2015 CPI for energy deflation there is, as I mentioned, a result of this dramatic and unexpected slide in crude oil prices that started this past summer, accelerated through the fall, Prices were around $57 a barrel when I updated this chart last week. They've actually fallen again since then. So the slide continues. These prices are considerably lower than they have been in years. They're likely to remain that way for some time. Inventories are extraordinarily high. Demand is relatively low. And in fact, this is, again, from the Moody's Analytics February forecast. This doesn't have oil prices above $100 a barrel in the next 5 years. So the increased production of oil by the US and the continued high output by OPEC has led to these really abundant inventories. And global demand for oil has been slowing recently, which means that this glut is probably going to persist long enough to keep these prices low through the end of the decade anyway. Of course, we get to see these crude oil prices declining. We get to see them in two places, primarily, at the gas pump and when we fill our heating oil tanks. Gasoline prices are lower now than we've seen since 2009 in the depths of the recession. Low gasoline prices are beneficial for consumers on two fronts. First, they help keep more money in our pockets when we go to fill up. And those savings do add up. I was calculating the other day what my sort of relative savings are. I commute from Union. It's 30 miles each way, so it's 60 miles just on my commute in a day. I figure if these prices stay around this range, probably saving about $500 just on the commute. That doesn't include driving to daycare and everything I do on the weekends. And those low prices are also providing a psychological boost. So every time you drive past the gas station, which if you're like me, you do multiple gas stations in a day, it reminds you that you didn't have to spend as much the last time you filled up. So that you see those savings every time you go past, and that really translates into thinking about being able to spend that money on other things. Heating oil prices, of course, have also been lower through this heating season compared to the past few years. That's great news for those of us with oil-burning furnaces and really, really old, drafty houses. The combined effect of the low prices for gasoline and the low prices for heating oil really is a boost for both individuals and businesses, with a few exceptions, primarily in the energy industry. We've been able to take the money that we saved on these lower fuel costs and put it towards other expenses. So at the low point in this chart, heating oil prices were almost $1.50 a gallon cheaper than a year ago. That's a savings of $300 if you're putting 200 gallons in your heating oil tank. So on average, prices for heating oil this season have been 82 cents a gallon cheaper than last season. If you're using, let's say, 750 gallons of heating oil over the winter, that's a savings of $615. That is a mortgage payment, or a couple of car payments, or a month's worth of daycare. You can see how I measure things. For some of us, that means repairing the damage caused by ice dams in the roof over the winter, but there are also more exciting ways that you can spend that cash too. In fact, Maine saw a very strong holiday shopping season and recently overall growth in taxable retail sales. The fourth quarter of 2014 saw an increase of almost 7% compared to 2013, and December alone increased over 10% compared to the previous year. And growth has been strong across all categories as well. That's something that's important to note. And food stores, restaurants, lodging, and auto transportation all saw double-digit increases in December, year over year. Look at that, lodging, 20% increase from December 2013 to December 2014. Now, keep in mind, these figures just reflect taxable sales. Maine exempts many purchases from the sales tax. This means that we have a relatively narrow base. It's highly susceptible to these fluctuations in the economy. When a recession hits, the taxable retail sales plummet. Times when the economy is growing, we see really big increases as well. I know that everybody's heard about the governor's tax proposal eliminating many of the exemptions, expanding the taxable sales base, most notably to include services that haven't previously been taxed. This would provide some stability to this sales base and the sales tax revenue streams. It would also simplify the current sales tax structure as well. So housing. There have been some positive signs on the housing front as well. I talked about the importance of real estate earlier. I want to include a few charts on housing. Housing permits here, they've been trending upward both nationally and in Maine since 2011. This is a very noisy data series for Maine. It's small numbers, so it bounces around a lot. Looking at percentage changes wouldn't make a lot of sense. So this is actually raw numbers for Maine and the US plotted on different axes. But you can see that the general trend is the same, upward. Maine went from around 150 permits per month on a seasonally adjusted basis back in 2011. Now we're around 225 permits over 2013 and 14. And if you look at the last couple of data points there, it looks like we might be starting to trend even higher than that. And Maine's, as I said, Maine's trend really has pretty much followed the same trend as the US. Existing family home sales. These also have been doing pretty well in Maine in recent months. November 2014 wasn't as good as November 2013, but that was actually only the second time since mid-2011 when Maine home sales didn't see year-over-year growth. The housing market continued to see growth during a period of national slowdown in 2013 and 14. You can see the US line there dipped below the 0%, but Maine continued to see growth during that period. And then home prices have been trending up as well. The Portland area MSA, which is actually all of York, Cumberland, and Saginaw counties, and that's the particular data series that I have access to, has seen higher median sale prices for existing single-family homes than the US for some time now, but the gap really has been closing recently. Prices for the US have been increasing faster than prices for Maine. And some of this might be due to the fact that Maine has this incredibly long foreclosure process. So there's sort of an existing inventory of houses that are going through this process and might be dragging down the price increases a little bit. So that was all the charts. Made it through. Thank you for bearing with me through those, especially so early in the morning. I want to turn now to talking about some broader trends and some highlights. First off, the challenges for this year. Demographics are a challenge now. They will be for some time. This is why it is so important to develop policies that will strengthen Maine's demographic situation. We need to do everything we can to attract more workers to the state and make sure that those people already here are supported and engaged in Maine's economy. Demographic trends are slow to change. You do not change your birth rate or your migration rate overnight. It just does not happen. So we need to put policies in place now that are going to help shift our demographics in the coming years. At a larger scale, we need to keep an eye on what's happening around the world. Maine's economy operates within a global context. It's impacted by things like exchange rates, European deflation, conflict in Syria, slowing growth in China. If there are too many international risk factors, too many things going on globally, that can slow the US economy and in turn slow Maine's economy as well. That said, I'm optimistic about 2015. It's nice to be able to say that after several years of very slow growth. I think we're going to see some solid economic growth this year. Employment growth was going to probably continue to be strongest in professional and business services and education and health services. I don't see that changing anytime soon. Energy prices have been a real boon recently. They're going to probably continue to remain low through most of the year, especially during the summer. I think we're going to see a really strong summer tourism season. It's been a very, very long winter in many places. Boston saw the snowiest winter on record. That means people are anticipating their summer vacations. I know I'm really looking forward to summer. So folks who are anticipating those are probably starting to make some plans now about getting away, hopefully to Maine this summer. Gasoline prices are going to be lower than they have been in several years, which means it's going to be cheaper for those people to hit the road and drive up here. And then, of course, with the stronger national economic growth, people are feeling a little more inclined to go out and actually spend some money to go on vacation. I mentioned this briefly already. I want to highlight again the fact that Maine's economy does not operate in a vacuum. We are part of this larger economy. We need to be aware of these national and international trends. Nationally, the Federal Reserve Bank is likely to start raising interest rates later this year. There's a lot of debate about when exactly that's going to be. I was listening to the radio this morning and they were talking about whether the all-important word patience is going to be in their report from their meeting this month. But the general consensus is they will raise interest rates sometime this year. We don't know exactly when, we don't know exactly how much. But the national economy is strong enough at this point that it really shouldn't cause any major slowdowns. And while US growth has been robust, economic growth has been slowing in other parts of the world, including Europe and China. One of the results is that the US dollar is very, very strong right now. And this, of course, impacts prices of exports and imports. If you are a Maine business trying to export goods to the other part of the world, you may be struggling a little bit with the current exchange rates. On the flip side, it is a boon for consumers of imported goods. Those goods are now relatively cheaper to purchase. We also do have some added opportunities for exportation of goods as the International Marine Terminal down in Portland has been expanding and developing more trade relationships with Iceland and the North Atlantic region. So I think that that may help compensate for some of the other challenges with the exchange rates. So I'm going to sum up here. Overall, I think 2015 is going to be a year of economic growth for Maine, especially with the current low energy prices. Interest rates will start going up later this year. As I said, the timing and the rate of the increase may have an effect on the economy later on. It really shouldn't slow things this year, though. And just as I started with demographics, I'm going to end with it, too. Maine's population is continuing to age. This has very real implications for the economy and the state, especially in terms of workforce availability. Cannot overemphasize the importance of demographics. We need to enact policies that will address Maine's demographic situation and make sure that Maine is a place where people can find well-paying jobs and businesses can find skilled workers. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take any questions you have. I also have contact information, so if you have anything later on, you can feel free to get in touch with me then. Thank you.
Thank you again to Amanda, and please join us next month at our Business Insider Breakfast to discuss safe computing with Matt Burgess.